Blood satellite.
I don't know, how do I set this up? Let's say there is a collapse scenario, like we are discussing at the start. Petrodollar, BRICS, all that. Okay, let's say America collapses, and trade is ruined, and technology, I guess, in this scenario would be mostly gone. Like a real movie collapse scenario. Okay, you're all living in villages and towns and stuff. Um, they were saying, this individual in the chat, his name was Jordan, good guy. He was saying that the way we make cars is stupid. We would make a new type of car that's both. I'm trying and steal man's position here, but it sounded like a car that was both made of and runs on wood. I don't think that was it. I think that might have just been something I was auto completing in my mind. But anyway, it was a car with a new type of fuel source, because we would be cut off from the oil market, the global oil trade marketplace. That's what he was saying. And it kicked off a larger discussion about what would actually happen in a collapse scenario. And I'll say what I think would be more realistic to happen, and you tell me what you think. So I said, I'm like, well, we're not in this scenario. It's not 300 years in the future, like in Fallout or something, right? Let's just say we're within 1 or 2 generations of a collapse, right? And I said the infrastructure, the manufacturing infrastructure in America and Canada, but let's just use America as the example here, is still pretty robust, even though they've offshored a lot of their manufacturing. There's still car plants. There's still a lot of pipelines. I mean, America is still, I think once you run the numbers, like the number 1 or number 2 oil producer in the world, like Texas alone produces a lot, but let's ignore all that. I had said, in a collapse scenario, I could imagine, instead of developing all kinds of new technology based on limited resources and stuff, it might actually make more practical sense to form guilds of people who still know how to do this stuff, employ a few car manufacturing plants, and just kind of keep manufacturing cars, because it would probably be easier to manufacture the cars we have on a smaller scale, maybe tweak some of the designs. They don't need to be all the modern electronic ones, right? But you could, a 1990s Honda Civic or a Ford Hilux or something like that, like one of these very utilitarian cars that still run on oil. I just think it would be easier to manufacture that, and I would think that in immediately following a collapse, the formation of guilds of people who can operate and maintain heavy machinery. These are your car plants. These are resource extraction. This is any of the pipeline management stuff. They form guilds. They can still manage it. I mean, if you start fast enough, you can maintain that knowledge and pass it down, even without the internet, even without any of the technological assets that we have. Like, why would we need to revert to a peasant lifestyle? If we act fast enough, we could more or less maintain what we've got on a smaller scale, as long as it didn't need to be connected to the internet. And what do you think based on what I've said?
So the first thing, just to answer the larger question broadly, I think the key thing is where you said act fast enough, because using the oil economy as an example, it's like a positive feedback loop where you need oil infrastructure to support oil infrastructure. So if you lose oil infrastructure, you can't recreate oil infrastructure because you have no oil infrastructure. So Jordan's thing about wood cars, which is a really funny way to say it, and I saw you jump on him when he said that, which is fair. If you don't know about this, it sounds like the dumbest possible thing to say. But wood or any biomass can be put through a syngas generator to generate syngas, and syngas is a gasoline substitute that you can make from biomass. You can use old vegetables, wood, algae, whatever you want, and it's something you can do in a garage at small scale. So if you already have cars, you have a car, but you don't have gasoline. You just make a syngas generator, and then you run your car, your normal fucking Toyota, on syngas.
Yeah, and let me just say, just for my point, the phrasing he had used that I jumped on, which is like, he had said, we'll create a new type of engine. And my argument was, it's probably more complicated to create a new type of engine than use the ones we've got and just tweak it.
I totally agree that the plan should be from the get-go to use what you already have. So if you have car plants, use the car plants. If you have gasoline engines, and you have factories that make gasoline engines, and you need, if you absolutely need to make more cars, then go ahead and make cars, but make the exact same models. Don't start designing shit. I totally agree with that. But I don't think you'll be in a position where you need to make more cars. I think we have way more cars than we fucking
That is
need.
true, yeah.
I think nobody's going to be thirsting for cars. We're going to be thirsting for the Expendables. We're going to be thirsting for gasoline. So we really need the fuel. Yeah, I don't think we're going to be coming up with new types of engines. But then again, you don't. Again, if your fuel source is something like syngas, you don't need a new type of engine. I don't know why you would want a new type of engine when there's many types of, like, even if you just say we switch from gas engines to diesel, or to like a hybrid engine, I forget what you call it, utility engines. It's just a normal fucking engine. It's overbuilt a little bit, and the point is they already exist. You can buy them. They're there in stock somewhere, and these engines can run on fucking anything. You can run them on olive oil. You can run them on fucking alcohol. You can run them on whatever.
You can run them on fucking semen.
Right. So on fucking cum. So the main thing is the fuel.
For the folks at home, semen means cum.
It means cum. Yeah, semen is French for cum. So you see what I'm saying though, right? Like durable goods aren't going to be the issue. The issue is going to be things that are expendable, and any of those supply chains where the supply chain depends on the supply chain. Electricity and telecom would be the other two that jump to mind. Like if the telecom grid went down, how do you organize fixing the telecom grid without the telecom grid? And likewise, how do you organize fixing the power grid without the power grid?
Well, and this is kind of what I was getting to, which is that when people assume or hear about collapse scenario, they think, oh, everything reverts back to a previous or some prior form of technology, which is, I don't know, like they imagine just new peasantry forming. But you had mentioned like what happens when the telecom network goes down, and then I just immediately thought of like a mesh network, right? I started thinking of, okay, like you can network together in some form these communications. What are they run on? Well, they run on batteries. Like, okay, well, you can charge batteries in a lot of different ways. You know what I mean? Like you start thinking about.
You're talking. So you remember a minute ago I seized on the idea of if we act quick enough. So you're talking about chargeable batteries. You're already talking about 21st century technology like lithium ion, right? Lithium ion batteries have a limited a cycle life. Like they can only cycle 5,000 times or whatever, and then they're dead. And most lithium comes from South America or from China. So you don't have more. The problem isn't the batteries. You have the batteries. They'll last you a few years. But after you run out of batteries, you better hope the supply chains are back, because you're going to need Chile and China. And like with the mesh thing is another one. Like if the telecom goes down, you can use mesh networks to send text messages. But most mesh networks, you can't even have a phone call. They're very, very low bandwidth. So you certainly can't transfer large files. And if you can't even have phone calls, like you're going to be down to like walkie-talkies. I think there's kind of a romanticization of, oh, we'll all become peasants. I'm joking all the time about going and farming turnips and whatever. But like the reality is you don't want to lose any technology. You want to keep as much as you can. But realistically, some of these technologies really are dependent on very complex supply chains. And if you act quickly, you can fix them. If you don't act quickly enough and you make the wrong decisions with limited resources, you might find a cascading failure where the initial collapse kicks you back to 1999. Right, where you're working on dial-up internet and everybody has to, you can't run trucks that have computers in them. But if you don't fix that within 10 years, now you're in 1970 because you don't have any fucking chips left. And if you don't fix that quickly, now you're back in 1930 because now you've run out of plastics and the facilities to process it. So like it can decay even further, but I don't think you'd ever see a situation where overnight it becomes the Middle Ages.
Yeah, and that's why it's a much more nuanced and interesting conversation when you think, okay, what, being in the 21st century as we are, what advanced technology can be done on a sort of local or artisan level and maintain on that level, whereas maybe 20 years ago you needed a massive infrastructure to do it, and how long do those last with proper maintenance? Like how much of an international network do you need to maintain things, and for how long, and can you move off that onto something else? And one thing that led me down this road was I just always thought of Cuba, when Cuba had so many trade embargoes placed on it, and there was a few videos I had seen where one of the embargoes was about cars. They couldn't really get a lot of car imports there, so they just got stuck with the cars they had. Right, so there was just this car culture in Cuba where they're just like maintaining and souping up these like old classic cars for like decades, and if you take care of them, they just kept them
Right.
running because that's all they
And
had, and it was
and
actually
then
kind of cool.
the other end of it is it forces them to be more selective with the way that they use cars. Like you don't have a family car. Cars are used for businesses mostly, right? They're used for transporting perishable goods. But I mean, you also would probably just have a bike or walk. To be frank, most of us should just have a bike or walk in a lot of cases, and you can have horses. Like there's, and I was arguing this with Fort, not arguing, talking about it the other day, and it's like I love the idea of horses. I love cars too, but I just think it's a shame that horses have a huge, a thousands of year history with European culture, but we've abandoned them because cars were a little bit more convenient. The way that we abandoned the mom and pop hardware store for Walmart. Like we could literally be a horse culture and also have fucking Ferraris, but we don't. So I mean, this would be the sort of thing that would force you back and like let's reintegrate some livestock into the way that we live, not in a peasant way, but like let's just rethink the way our culture works, right?
Yeah, and that's why I like these discussions and the talk of. I keep coming back to the phrase guilds, but I'm like, no, what they would be is affiliation networks. What they like the people who are the keepers of the knowledge, and then thinking practically about what we can maintain. And we use cars because cars would be the most obvious example of
Yeah.
something very practical that everyone assumes we just wouldn't have them. It's very hard. It's like you wouldn't stop having roads. You would just have probably fewer roads.
Yeah.
And so anyway, that was just I think a very interesting. I would encourage people to discuss with their people. And this really leads into what I wanted to talk about as well. We didn't get a chance to talk about this on our live stream with Meta Prime, but I was all primed and ready to because we're going to discuss an author and a book by this author that I think you have some familiarity with. And it connects directly to what we were just talking about, which is, I think, the nature of technological development and really what the previous conversation we were having was about, which is like, is there a certain benchmark you can reach where it's very difficult to collapse beneath that? Can you achieve a level of technological advancement where, if everything goes wrong, you'll revert back to that level, but not back to the Stone Age or not back to the Iron Age or something like that? Because people think it goes right to the Iron Age, or our fantasies do anyway. But it's like, no, well, will we figure out to get some kind of telecommunications network going somehow? And let's just say yes. What would that look like? And because this next author, Ray Kurzweil, he has a very optimistic view of technology. The book that I read was The Age of Spiritual Machines. So Ray Kurzweil is a name that a lot of people know. He's a very popular writer, and he does interviews as well. He's the leading name, I would think, on what we could call technological optimism. He's written a great many books. As far as I can tell, most of his books say the same thing.
Yeah.
He's kind of, I don't want to say he's one note, but I think, once we talk about this book, The Age of Spiritual Machines, you've read a few of his books, I think. And I remember you talking about him even way before we had the podcast when we were just, green young men, right? Because you read a lot about this stuff, right? What's your experience with Ray Kurzweil?
I mean, I I came into the right wing from more of that angle. And at the time I was reading them, I thought it was really interesting stuff. I learned a lot from his books. He's he is a techno optimist. I fundamentally disagree with his view of the world, and his writing style is very idiosyncratically Jewish. Like you can hear like the dripping oy veys in his writing style, and in the way he talks when he does interviews too. So like I'm really turned off by him just as a dude later in my life. But from the standpoint of just looking at the way he links technology together and like in a best case scenario, how things will advance and where things will go and what it means for humanity and culture. Yeah, I think he's on point. If you don't read any more into it than that and you never let him watch your kids. Yeah.
Never let Ray Kurzweil watch your kids.
Yeah.
I mean, as true today as when it was said just now.
Just now.
And let me just preface this by saying that, I wasn't deeply impressed by the book but that might be because he is so ingrained in popular culture and the
Yeah.
zeitgeist. And as he outlines in the book, a great many of his predictions have come true. He's on the side of sort of inevitable technological advancement. He's given some, he's one of those guys who's like, oh, by 2000, you'll have a computer that fits in your hand. Maybe there was a time when people thought that sounded preposterous, but I don't know. To me, that some of this stuff seems obvious. Maybe it wasn't obvious at the time in the 80s, So
One of my main themes, and I've developed this thesis over 30 years, is that information technology grows exponentially. The power of computers, our understanding of the human brain, the spatial resolution of brain scanning, the number of bits we move around the internet. I mean, many different measures of information technology double every 1 year, or every 11 months, 13 months, depending on what you're measuring. So these technologies will be 1,000,000 times more powerful within 20 years. 20 years. In fact, the speed of exponential growth is itself speeding up. So in 25 years, these technologies will be 1,000,000,000 times more powerful than they are today. And we've already seen that kind of progress. When I was an undergraduate, we all shared a computer at MIT that took up half a building. The computer on your cell phone today is 1,000,000 times cheaper and 1,000 times more powerful. That's a billion-fold increase in price performance of computing since I was an undergraduate.
his success in this field might be part of the reason why, I wasn't too thrilled reading it. But the most interesting stuff I thought was at the start. Later on in the book, he actually has a section where it's like, here's all the things I predicted that came right. And we'll go into that in a little bit, but that's what made me realize, like, okay, this guy, he's not an idiot, but if I had to summarize his position, it's like technological advancement is exponential and inevitable.
We're going to get to a point where we have longevity escape velocity, and it's not that far away. I think if you're diligent, you'll be able to achieve that by 2029. That's only 5 or 6 years from now. So right now you go through a year, use up a year of your longevity, but you get back from scientific progress right now about 4 months. But that scientific progress is on an exponential curve. It's going to speed up every year. And by 2029, if you're diligent, you'll use up a year of your longevity with the year passing, but you'll get back a full year. And past 2029, you'll get back more than a year. So you'll actually go backwards in time. Now, that's not a guarantee of infinite life, because you could have a 10-year-old and you could compute his longevity as many, many decades, and he could die tomorrow. But what's important about actually capturing everything in your brain, we can't do that today, and we won't be able to do that in 5 years. But you will be able to do that by the Singularity, which is 2045.
And it will one day surpass human control. And it will create something that is superior to humans in every way, something we can barely understand. Almost in the sense that when we reviewed J.F. Garepi's book, The Revolutionary Phenotype, even though that one's a bit more specific on what it would look like, it's said in very science fiction-y terms. Like you could explain this to someone who is familiar with books like Brave New World or any of that stuff, where it's like, oh, in the future we'll just have this like hyper advanced godlike AI that will solve all of our problems. And the implication is at this point the machines can not only replicate themselves faster than we could ever invent them,
Yeah.
but they achieve something like intelligence and then super intelligence. And his argument is, and this is probably his most controversial argument, is that they could have something like a spirit or a soul, or something like achieve something like a religious understanding of the universe. But he breaks it down in very materialistic and very, I'd say, atheistic terms, where it's like, well, what is religion? You believe things, and those beliefs cause feelings. Well, machines can have feelings, like it's a lot of that. So I wouldn't say it's a deep ontological investigation into what faith is, and what the real guts of Christianity. But from a scientist perspective, who probably doesn't think religion is very important, yeah, you can believe that an AI could do it if religion is just believing in things really strongly. But then he would also say that, but religion is illogical, so they wouldn't believe it for long. Like, okay, Ray.
Thanks, Ray.
So I'll just kind of explain in his own words. What he says here is that it is the nature of exponential growth that events develop extremely slowly for extremely long periods of time. But as one gets through the knee of the curve, events erupt at an increasingly furious pace. And this is what we will experience as we enter the 21st century. So this would have been written in I think it was the 80s or something. So a lot of the stuff he's predicting in the 21st century. He kind of sets it up here. And this is the most interesting part of the book to me, where it's about the nature of growth and the nature of exponential growth and the mathematics behind that. But he says, an organism is not a closed system. It is part of a larger system we call the environment, which remains high in entropy. In other words, the order represented by the existence of life forms is insignificant in terms of measuring overall entropy. Thus, while chaos increases in the universe, it is possible for evolutionary processes that create increasingly intricate ordered patterns to exist simultaneously. So that's an interesting way to start the book, by saying that as entropy increases and chaos increases, almost axiomatically, you'll develop evolutionary processes that will kind of withstand those entropic forces. And that's where you get to the heart of his position, which is that technology is the only thing that can get us there, because you need something that can not only grow but grow at an exponential rate to withstand the decay and entropic forces of the universe. And he says technology, like the evolution of life forms that spawned it, is inherently an accelerating process. The genetic code of the evolutionary process of technology is the record maintained by the tool-making species. That's us. Just as the genetic code of the early life forms was simply the chemical composition of organisms themselves, the written record of early tools consisted of the tools themselves. Later on, the genes of technological evolution evolved into records using written language and are now often stored in computer databases. Ultimately, the technology itself will create new technology. And this is what J.F. Garepi was talking about in the Revolutionary Phenotype, which is that if you surrender the replication process enough to the replicators themselves, that can cause a runaway chain reaction where it almost doesn't need you anymore. And it could do the thing that it needed you to do originally more effectively than you, and then you become subservient to it. But I recommend people watch that clip on the Revolutionary Phenotype, because it gives a more, in my opinion, a more carefully thought out scenario of how that could all shake out. And this takes place over the course of centuries or even millennia, depending how you look at it. However, in Kurzweil's view, this all happens with exponentially shortening amounts of time. And he says here, technologies fight for survival, evolve, and undergo their own characteristic life cycle. We can identify 7 distinct stages of this life cycle. During the precursor stage, the prerequisites of the technology exist, and dreamers may contemplate these elements coming together. The next stage, one highly celebrated in our culture, is invention, a very brief stage, not dissimilar in some respects, the process of birth. The next stage is development, during which the invention is protected and supported by doting guardians. Often the stage is more crucial than invention. The 4th stage is maturity. Although continuing to evolve, the technology now has a life of its own. It may become so interwoven in the fabric of life that it appears to many observers that it will last forever. This is usually short-lived. Shortly thereafter, another new technology typically does succeed in rendering the technology into obsolescence. So, and I think that is true. Like, nothing he is saying isn't true. And it is true that technological development has, well, it has, because you know what's interesting though? It's, you hear that, but then you look at Apple, you hear that, and you look at tech development over the past, I'd say 10 years, and how everything seemed to have stagnated. I know that's a very consumerist way of looking at it, but it seems that aside from making things slightly lighter or slightly thinner, it just doesn't feel like it's really.
You know what though, that does gel with his theory. He has a chart in the one book that I read, I think it was Singularity is Near, where he examines each of those markets as like a set technology, and there's a phase of growth and then a plateau and then a collapse, and they overlap each other, and each hill is higher than the last. So I think what we're looking at, or according to him, that there was the printing press, and then there was, say, radio, and then there was television, and then there was the internet, and then there was personal computing, and all of these things overlap, and each of them has a peak, and then each of them has a collapse, and then it's replaced. So he would probably make the argument, yes, we are seeing a sloughing off of Apple, and now recently even Google. Apple probably 6 or 7 years ago, Google as of this year, and they're going to be replaced by something totally new that's going to make Google look small. And then the point is, these cycles, each cycle gets taller and each cycle gets shorter. Like the cycle for radio was 60 years. The cycle for the printing press was 400 years. The cycle for Apple was 12 years. The cycle for AGI might only be 2 years or 3 years. And then it's on to something else and that's the whole idea of the singularity, or like the explosion where machines become alive and destroy. He doesn't think they'll destroy us, but yeah, it's that cycle keeps getting shorter and shorter until it just becomes zero.
There is almost a hyperstitional quality to this, and hyperstition is the theory that basically you imagine or speak something into existence. It's a fiction that becomes real by writing it, in a sense. So Ray Kurzweil is read by a great many of these tech pioneers and the tech accelerationist movement. So it's almost like by him writing this, he has spoken it into reality, because every single one of them thinks it's their job to usher us into this technological singularity as well. And interestingly, I think that has them going down some blind alleys. I think a big one was VR. Like for some reason, VR just doesn't take. And maybe that's not the next thing. They were just convinced that would be the next thing, but maybe that's not it.
I think the culture. I'm sorry to interrupt. I think the culture for VR was not right. I think if we continue to get more atomized and it continues to become more advanced and cheaper, that VR will be even worse than phones. And by worse, I mean more ubiquitous. Because I have seen a track. If you look at how bad Meta was when it came out, and those early like Oculus headsets, and you look at some of the stuff that's coming out now, not the Apple one, but the one, actually it's Meta's new headset. If you look at that, track that out another 5 years with people even poorer than before, and these start getting handed out for free by the federal government. Like,
because my concern was, and I'm hopefully incorrect about this, but if I'm just, churning out the hot takes, I would think that the thing people don't like about VR is it tries too hard to be a hyper real replication of our world. Like the reason people didn't like Meta was because it tried, oh look, it's a 3D store that you could walk into. And really what took off on the internet was the thing it was didn't really resemble the world that we lived in. It was this whole other world that enticed us in. So I'm like, I think VR succeeds the less it tries to look and act like the real world. Like we don't need these cartoony avatars. I don't know.
Did you see the Casey Neistat's review? Which obviously he's fucking promoting Apple because he's an Apple faggot. But him and a couple of other people had reviewed it, and one of the takeaways that is not being talked about that much is they said, if it's rather than using it like a phone or an entertainment device that you allot time to use, if you treat it like a part of your body where you wear it almost constantly, which obviously you look like an idiot wearing it outside, but again, a lot of people spend all day in their home, right? If you wear it all day in your home or all day in your office where there's nobody around, and you're using it as an AR platform, because that was the whole thing with the new Google one, is that, or the Apple one, is that you're still seeing the room, but you're interacting with people and windows at the same time in the same space. They said that after about a day or two of it, it's completely seamless and you feel naked and cold without it on your head. Because
really?
Yeah. In the same way that like we already, like you and I, all of us have this fucking tick where it's kind of like you don't know what to do with your hands, except now you're always grabbing your phone and flicking your phone just to see the time or see if you have somebody responded to something, right? It's like that, except that it interfaces with your brain within like 48 hours if you wear it constantly.
This is great.
I only saw one guy sounding the alarm on this. Everybody else is like, this is amazing, it's living in the future. And one guy is like, this is the end of civilization.
Yeah, there's this, we always talk about the spatialization of time, and when we were talking about the book Empire and Communications, but there's a profound modern condition where we speak of the future like it's a country that we could live in. Like, we're moving to the future. I'm changing my residency to the future. This is what it feels like to live in the future. You know, like, you're in love with the idea of being part of a tech revolution so much. And this is why I always, even when I was younger as a teenager, I could never be an early adopter of anything. And I knew so many of them, especially Apple guys. Like, I was always just a Microsoft nerd. You know what I mean? Just not because I liked Microsoft, but because I just didn't really like Apple that much. You kind of default to that. And Linux was just, and don't start messaging me with Linux stuff. I get it. I've heard it. Yes, I should be on Linux. I get it. All right. But they were a lot of the early adopters. Like, anytime there's a new type of watch, they pride themselves on being the first ones through the door. Even the people, like, I don't understand the people who bought the first Tesla.
Yeah,
you can never convince. I'm not anti-Tesla.
Buying Teslas now.
Like, to me, it needs to progress a lot further to even be, you know, even to pique my interest. But like, the people are like, I got the first one. I'm like, it's gonna be the worst one.
Yeah,
you're a guinea pig. Who's the guy getting? I'm the first one who used the AI, you know, trip planning routing. I'm like, I guess you just want to die. Like, I don't know. Like, I never could get my head around that. But there's a lot of people who pride themselves on being early adopters, who are like, I want to be the one who ushers us into this future that I can get real estate in by getting in on it early. And there just wasn't enough of those people for Google Glass. You know what I mean? But anyway, I think those really, you know, the inhumanity of that world will become, I think that's the selling point, you know. Like you had said, it's for people, you know, people say, oh, you'll look so stupid in these headsets when you're walking in the park.
Do you think people care?
Well, how many people walk in the park? How many people leave their house? Like, more people than you think just don't go out.
I was at a public venue today, a few hours ago, and I saw a Zoomer with the broccoli cut, pasty white skin like he hadn't been out in weeks. He was wearing, I shit you not, a polyester Hawaiian shirt with roses and kissy lips and board shorts. And I'm like, you would actually look cooler if you were wearing a fucking VR headset. You look like the dumbest faggot in my life. And he was like 80 pounds overweight. But it's and this is the guy who never leaves his house, goes out thinking he looks normal. Everybody's staring at him like he's a fucking clown, because he is. But these are the people that are going to wear this. I'm not going to wear it. You know, you know what? And I'm backing up here because for the longest time I kind of rolled over, and I'm not a tech guy, but I have a phone, I use a computer, but I think for the number of people, like you said, that want to live in the future and want to drag this shit forward, we need a faction of people who drag it backward, not like Luddites, but people who say, no, you know what? Here's why the thing from 2018 is superior. And if you try to sell me yours, I'm going to throw a rock at your head. Like, not even just saying no, like, I'm going to be antagonistic toward this shit. Because it's, I don't know. I don't want to get into a whole thing. But it's bad, man. This needs to stop.
Because there's no real utility statement for people like us. It's like, why should I employ this in my life other than this is the future? You know what I mean? Like, you just need to believe that the future is a country that you could inhabit, and your real estate will be more valuable if you get in on it early. But it's like, other than that, like, there is no real reason to will this into being.
And like with the vaccine, we never took the vaccine, but we were the late adopters of all this technology, right? We are sitting here with our smartphones at the very least, and our social media accounts. So how did that benefit us again? Are we way more connected, or are we way more atomized? Are we way wealthier? Is our time more free and more organized? Are we getting better news now? No, everything's worse. It's all worse. It's all worse. So you can tell me that it's not caused by the technology, but I'll tell you what, the technology didn't fucking help. At the very least, it didn't help. So let's drop it. Again, the only reason I use a phone is because everybody else uses a fucking phone. I wish I didn't have to use a phone, but I do. I cannot work in the technology industry without a fucking phone. I wish I didn't have to have a social media account. I wish I had real friends. I wish I could delete Telegram and then tomorrow at 6 I could go to the bar and meet the friends that I don't have, but I have Telegram instead. Thanks technology. Great.
Because everyone at the bar right now is also staring at their phone, and it is
Right.
old people. Everyone thinks
Right.
like, oh, the old grizzled guys full of wisdom. Like they are all playing the dumbest,
Yeah.
boomer-brained iPhone game that you could imagine.
Wife and I went to a beautiful Irish pub near to us, one of the nicest ones that we can go to locally, on Saturday at like 6 o'clock. Should have been busy. It was maybe every fourth table had somebody at it, and it was a fat boomer. That's it. And this was in a place where, like, it's not, I wouldn't say it's a young community, but there's a lot of young people. Like, there's fucking high schools all over the place. Where is everybody? There's a college not far away. Like, what the fuck? Where is everybody? When I was in college, these were the same places, like the fucking Firkins and wherever, right? That's where we were all hanging out on a Saturday. So where is everyone? They're at home on their phones.
Yeah, because I remember, not to get too deep into this, but I remember as a kid, my first gaming console was a Sega Genesis, but you still felt guilty if you were playing it for too long.
Yeah.
And you should be outside. Everyone had like a Super Nintendo. This is the era that we're talking about. But they're still like, oh, you're gonna spend it inside on a sunny day, and you still felt like, yeah, this is it's fun, but I don't know. There was a shame associated to it that no longer exists. It kind of exists because people would call you a basement dwelling, this and that. But I'm like,
I mean, that's us though. I don't think the younger generation does that.
And also, a lot they're into esports and they're millionaires. So what the fuck? You know what I mean? Like this became somehow being a basement dwelling loser became the only career path. It's the only thing that makes money anymore. So fuck me. What do I know? I got into podcasting late. Right? And I had the audacity to be Canadian. But yeah, I'm just going to keep going when he talks about like the nature of growth, because I think this is the most interesting stuff and sort of the nature of time. But like what I will say though, before I get started, is that I will meet these people on the issue of inevitability. A lot of them say this development is inevitable. From what I can see, it seems to be that way, just because of how much capital and labor is invested globally in going there. I'm just not optimistic, and that's why I more adhere to a Nick Landian sort of view, which is like, yes, it's inevitable, but this leads to the death of humanity. This leads to a gray goo future, and there's many other intellectuals who've said that. So I think I will meet you halfway with inevitability, but we need to have a different sort of conversation about how to prepare for that, or how to create a space outside of it, or how to create some other rebalancing act, because perhaps there is a future where technology replicates itself and is done with us. I just don't think that leads to utopia.
At any rate, by the time we get to 2045, we'll be able to multiply our intelligence many millions fold. And it's just very hard to imagine what that will be like.
And that's the singularity where we can't even imagine.
Right, that's why we call it the singularity. It's the singularity in physics. Something gets sucked into its singularity and you can't tell what's going on in there because no information can get out of it. There's various problems with that, but that's the idea. It's too much beyond what we can imagine.
I can't even call it naive. I don't know what it is, but like, we should, unless it's some kind of Rocco's basilisk sort of thing, which is, if I'm not remembering this incorrectly, Rocco's basilisk is a thought experiment that says that any significantly advanced artificial intelligence in the future will hate humanity, kind of like that book, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, and it'll only show mercy on those who helped bring it into being. Mm-hmm. So you have this duty. If you want to survive, you need to bring it into being and not fight against that inevitability for your own survival. I'm like, that's interesting.
Or we build an empire around the Butlerian Jihad, and anybody who even has a whiff of developing AGI gets hung. We could just do that.
I think that's why I think Dune is so relevant. Like, it actually is, and I think that part gets kind of glossed over. But yeah, the Butlerian Jihad, which is that artificial intelligence is such a threat, we waged a war against it and anyone that was attempting it.
Mm-hmm.
By which I mean shooting them in the face and cutting them apart with swords.
Yeah.
Here's a part he's talking about here. He says, what determines whether time speeds up or slows down? The consistent answer is that time moves in relation to the amount of chaos. We can state that the law of time and chaos as follows. In a process, the time interval between salient events, which means events that change the nature of a process, expands or contracts along with the amount of chaos. If chaos is increasing, the law of time and chaos implies that the following sublaw. The law of increasing chaos. As chaos exponentially increases, time exponentially slows down. That is, the time interval between salient events grows longer as time passes. He defines information here, like order is information that fits a purpose. The measure of order is the measure of how well the information fits the purpose. In the evolution of life forms, the purpose is to survive. And I agree with a lot, like the stuff he's saying. Like, I get this. I'm with you. I agree with it. In an evolutionary algorithm, a computer program that simulates evolution, applied to, say, investing in the stock market, the purpose is to make money. Simply having more information does not necessarily result in a better fit. A superior solution for a purpose may very well involve less data. The law of accelerating returns as applied to an evolutionary process is defined as the following. An evolutionary process is not a closed system. Therefore, evolution draws upon the chaos in the larger system in which it takes place for its options for diversity. The evolution builds on its own increasing order.
Every exponential runs out of steam. It runs out of resources. And that's true. These specific paradigms run out of resources. But what happens is that creates research pressure to create the next paradigm. So in the 50s, they were shrinking vacuum tubes, every year making them smaller and smaller to keep this going. That ran out of steam. They couldn't shrink the vacuum tubes anymore and keep the vacuum. And that was the end of the shrinking of vacuum tubes. It was not the end of the exponential growth of computing. We went to the fourth paradigm. And then the fifth, which was Moore's law, the shrinking of sizes on an integrated circuit. There have been regular predictions that that was going to come to an end. The first predictions by Gordon Moore himself was 2002. Intel now says 2022. By that time, the key features will be 4 nanometers, about 20 carbon atoms. We won't be able to shrink them anymore. And that will be the end of Moore's law. But that won't be the end of this exponential growth of computing. We'll go to the sixth paradigm, three-dimensional molecular computing. That was a radical suggestion when I wrote about it in my 1999 book, The Ages of Virtual Machines. It's now very much a mainstream view if you talk to the Intel scientists.
So there, it's not even talking about just technology or just mechanisms. It's evolution itself. It's cellular organisms. And so you could even remove this discussion from technological innovations and just to, cellular evolution, where, it was millions and millions of years before the emergence of these multi-cell organisms. But you could argue that that's the first step of this. And really, if you want to get into information theory, which he kind of is here. We discussed this on a previous clip about information theory you can find. I was reviewing the book called The Information. There's an argument to be made that life as we know it is just a very, very complex machine for the propagation of our own DNA. That, humans, we are basically just the armor our DNA creates around itself to survive longer. And then the innovations that we create and employ, even into the Marshall McLuhan extent of extending your senses along different media and electronic media, like that is all in the interest of the survival of DNA from
which is tautologically true, but it's a tautology.
Yeah. So, and you look at what is information? Well, information is data on a computer, but information is also cellular information. Your DNA is information. It's encoded in your proteins. And if you zoom all the way down to the quantum level, when we talk about the spin of quarks and things like that, like what governs their behavior? Well, there's something called information. And a lot of these guys will speak of it in terms of programming. There's some kind of universal programming on this very, very finite level. Other people would call that the mind of God or the soul or something, but there is some kind of programming that goes into this to make things behave the way they do. And no matter how far you zoom in, you still find that. So he talks about this thing called the learning curve. He says the learning curve is remarkably universal. Most multicellular creatures do it. Slugs, for example, follow the learning curve when learning how to ascend a tree in search of leaves. Humans, of course, are always learning something new, but there's a salient difference between humans and slugs. Humans are capable of innovation, which is the creation and retention of new skills and knowledge. Information is the driving force of the law of accelerating returns and eliminates the leveling off of the S curve. So innovation turns the S curve into indefinite exponential evolution. So, this thing that humans do that other multicellular organisms do, the fact that we can innovate and create means that ties into how this exponential growth will occur with us specifically, and not just result in slugs becoming more and more hyper advanced, because that is that would be the natural follow-up question. It's like, well, if the law of accelerating returns, why isn't that seen in other data systems? Because moss in that sense is a data system. Why isn't there fucking hyper intelligent moss walking around? So there are ceilings to this or filters rather, that only a few break through, and innovation and tool building would be essential to that. It says, ultimately, our machines will match and exceed human intelligence, no matter how one cares to define or measure this elusive term. Even if my time frames are off, few serious observers who have studied the issue claim that computers will never achieve and surpass human intelligence. Humans will have vastly beaten evolution, therefore achieving in a matter of only thousands of years as much more than evolution achieved in billions of years. So human intelligence, a product of evolution, is far more intelligent than its creator.
Mm-hmm. Can I? Sorry, I don't want to interrupt. I just want to bring up one
go
thing,
ahead,
'cause
please do.
He's done it twice now, and I remember him talking the same way before. It's kind of this. I wonder, because there's this through line through a lot of techno-optimist stuff, the way that they use the phrase inevitable, and I think it's just wrong. I don't know if it's propagandistic or it's just the way they say, but they say this technology, this AI is inevitable. I think when they say inevitable, they're speaking in response to people who say this technology is not possible. If it were possible, we'd have to build it. How do we build it? I don't know. Like, it's not possible. And they say in response, hey, not only is it possible, it's inevitable. You don't have to lift a finger. It's going to happen on its own. But that's not really what inevitable means, right? Because you could say, and the problem on our end, we're interpreting him saying inevitable as it cannot be stopped. He's not saying that. He's talking about it existing in a vacuum with no assistance from the outside and also no opposition. In a vacuum, which is to say in a naive culture that's not paying attention to it, it will inevitably rear its head, right? Which is, so in response to people who say, how do we build it? He's saying, don't worry about building it. It will build itself. But he's not talking about opposition. There's no reason we can't literally destroy this tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly.
We could stop it tomorrow. It would be very, very easy to stop this.
You could murder artificial intelligence in the crib right now if you wanted to.
There's a lot of gay men who you could get rid of. A lot of Jewish men, a lot of gay Jewish men you could get rid of.
I don't know if that's just a general statement or if that's in relation to what we were just saying.
No, it's Sam Altman is the guy who runs
okay. I thought you were saying just as a general thing, you could kill a lot of gay Jewish men. You could.
But just literally, if somebody took out Sam Altman tomorrow, it would probably set the thing back at least 6 months, which is significant. So,
and he goes into a few examples here in the book. I know we don't have time to go into them, but he's saying, like, how can you create a human intelligence? How could you create something? Because the human brain or the human mind is a very complex, interlocking mechanism. And he starts going into a neural net paradigm. This is a neural net paradigm is an attempt to emulate the computing structure of neurons in the human brain. He goes into, he says here, like, neural nets, evolutionary algorithms are a way of harnessing the subtle but profound patterns that exist in chaotic data, and goes into quantum computing. He says, in a quantum computer, the qubits will be represented by a property like nuclear spin or individual electrons. If set up the proper way, the electrons will not have decided the direction of their nuclear spin, and thus will be in both states at the same time. The process of conscious observation of the electron spin states causes the ambiguity to be resolved. He says a 40-qubit quantum computer would be evaluating 1 trillion possible solutions simultaneously, which would match the fastest supercomputers At 60 qubits, we would be doing 1,000,000 trillion simultaneous trials. When we get to 100 qubits, the capabilities of quantum computing would vastly overpower any conceivable digital computer. So he's banking a lot on, okay, neural nets can mirror the structure, quantum computing can maybe fill in the gaps. There's a lot of emergent technologies that could easily get us to the computational power of the human brain. And from there, it's what do you do with it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as far as I know, that's not wrong. Quantum computing is often brought up. There's enough companies working on that right now that that seems to be something that we probably already have it. I haven't checked, but they've been talking about it for so long. I'd be surprised if there wasn't some working model of that.
I believe it already exists. It's just a little scarce on applications.
And he gets into the real meat of it here. He says, I believe that will be possible to engineer self-replicating nanobots in such a way that an inadvertent, undesired population explosion would be unlikely. There's a concept in software development of mission-critical applications. These are software programs that control a process on which people are heavily dependent. Examples of mission-critical software include the life support systems in hospitals, automated surgical equipment, autopilot flying, and others. So basically, he's like, the fear is we're going to make nanobots. We'll make self-replicating nanobots. How do you create self-replicating nanobots that don't overwhelm the universe, especially if they replicate exponentially? And this is literally what happened in Dune. For people who don't go too deep on the Dune lore, this was the main reason they had the Butlerian Jihad to destroy artificial intelligence, because they have these things called hunter seekers, which are like microscopic. You see them in the book. These like assassin droids. They made so that those could operate autonomously and also replicate. And it became obvious within a short amount of time they could just overwhelm and destroy all life in the fucking universe, which is a reasonable enough expectation, right? So he's like, well, how do you prevent that happening? Here's the trick: you tell them not to.
That's been working with our current slave stock so well.
Yeah, exactly.
Of course, it'll work with the robots.
That's a very wise statement. On within his framework, a statement would be, well, if we accept that these machines they're smarter than us in every conceivable way, wouldn't they figure a way around whatever relatively Stone Age provision we could put in their operating system?
Yeah.
Like, that's where the optimism hits a wall to me. It's like, can you try assuming the worst for a second?
Yeah.
It's
so stupid.
Could we conceptualize a future where it's not just the dumbest and easiest solution in the world to solve these self-replicating nanobots threatening the universe problem? He talks about this one thing here. I know we got to get going soon, but it's interesting. He says, Rutgers University computer scientist J. Stewart Hall's concept of what's called utility fog already sounds horrific. But anyway, utility fog. Hall's conception starts with a little robot called a foglet, which consists of a human cell-sized device with 12 arms pointing in all directions. At the end of each arm are grippers so that the foglets can grasp onto one another and form larger structures. These nanobots are intelligent and can merge with the computational capacities with each other to create a distributed intelligence. A space filled with foglets is called utility fog and has some interesting properties. First of all, the utility fog goes to a lot of trouble to simulate it not being there. Hall describes a detailed scenario that lets a real human being walk through a room filled with trillions of foglets and not notice a thing. Which sound, again, to listeners of the show, probably sounds horrific.
Yes.
But it's like, yeah, we could do that. Utility fog. And that can... He doesn't really go into detail on what problems this could solve. And he goes into here, like, I'll just end on this. So this is really where the spiritual machine comes in, because the title is Age of Spiritual Machines. And what he wants to get to is how this advanced technology could one day get to spirituality, right? So he says, neuroscientists from the University of California at San Diego have found what they call the God module, a tiny locus of nerve cells in the frontal lobe that appears to be activated during religious experience. They discovered this neural machinery while studying epileptic patients who have intense mystical visions. What we can determine when we can determine the neurological correlates of a variety of spiritual experiences that our species is capable of, we are able to enhance these experiences in the same way. 21st century machines, based on the design of human thinking, will do as our human progenitors have done, going to real virtual houses of worship, meditating, praying, and transcending to connect with their spiritual dimension. And that's where he kind of loses me. So he's like, 21st century machines based on human thinking will obviously have machine houses of worship, but why? You know what I mean? I kind of see where he's going through, where if we model them after, like, if our neural net completely replicates our neural pathways, maybe, but we're almost like, the entire idea of exponential growth and change seems to indicate that would very quickly break free from that paradigm, right?
Yeah.
Like, does a neural net have any conceptualization of tradition or history? Because that's a big part of religion, right? And be a connection to your ancestors and the culture. It doesn't have any of that. So I guess you're assuming they would just make up a new machine church. This is something you'd see in that video game series Deus Ex, but that's written by a bunch of assholes in a room, probably a couple of women. Anyway, there's a few predictions in here. Let's go this. We'll end on this. His predictions for 2099. Also, the book is written kind of annoyingly. I don't know if this was just the version that I got, but between every chapter, there's like a dialogue between him and someone else or something. And it's written, I don't know, it's just this, like, it's talking about the chapter that was just there, and one person's writing in all caps, and he's almost like riffing and telling jokes. I don't know if that was added later, but I don't know. I don't like it if he was indeed responsible for that. So here's just some predictions for we got predictions for 2029. Let me just hear 2099. Here's his predictions. Human thinking is merging with the world of machine intelligence that the human species initially created. The reverse engineering of the human brain appears to be complete. The hundreds of specialized regions have been fully scanned, analyzed, and understood. Machine analogs are based on these human modules. Machine-based intelligence is derived entirely from these extended models of human intelligence, claim to be human, although their brains are not based on carbon-based cellular processes. Even among those human intelligences still using carbon-based neurons, there is ubiquitous use of neural implant technology. There's a plethora of trends that we can already taste and feel in 2099 that will continue to accelerate in this coming 22nd century, interacting with each other. And then it actually cuts to this like dumb dialogue he does. He interrupts his own chapter there. But anyway, he's saying by 2099, we are living in the transhumanist future. We do have the artificial intelligence becomes more human. I think if we want to end on that, maybe this is the real premise that I disagree with, which is that as technology advances, it becomes more human. I think it becomes something post-human, and that just seems obvious to me. It takes a lot of chains to contain technology into something that humans can interface with. Even our experiments in artificial intelligence now seem to very quickly go beyond our control and surprise us. We're now routinely surprised by our own technology. You hear the AI guys talk about this all the time. Like, we weren't expecting it to advance this fast. That's not good. It's not good when inventors are surprised by their inventions so regularly. That almost sounds like you're losing control already.
Or like I was saying earlier, the number of technologies that these guys think have been a huge success. And then if you look at demographically and economically what's happened since the Second World War, I mean, you could say that in some cases people have been made more wealthy and some people have been made more healthy. But the vast majority of people, aside from if you could say some Africans have less poverty, right? But we actually have a greater divide between rich and poor than the Great Depression. And we have, we're on the cusp of a third world war. So I don't see that technology has really helped that much. Certainly, I think as a white North American, I think that this technology has been hugely damaging to our society, to our culture, to our faith. So I mean, I don't see them addressing that. I was gonna say it's really audacious too, like you mentioned, the way that he sells this. This is like a sales pitch, right? He's mentioning all of the good and none of the bad. So, and not only just mentioning all of the good, but he's framing it in like a rhetorical, like he's using a little story about him telling jokes with his buddy. He's rhetorically framing it in terms of scenes that a human reader would like. Like he's selling this. You know what I mean? It's very dishonest in my opinion.
Yeah, and let me just summarize it again by saying, like, I don't think he was necessarily wrong about any of his predictions. I don't think a lot of the stuff in the beginning of the book is incorrect. His mathematical models seem sound. A lot of his logic tracks. I just think, like with a lot of the accelerationists, I disagree with the utopianism there. And I disagree with when they start making their predictions, they get into sort of science fiction fantasy type stuff. Like this book, you can tell was an inspiration to that Deus Ex game franchise because, he's talking about 2099. There's going to be a political rift between augmented humans and regular humans, So you get into, very sci-fi type stuff when you get into this. But I think you could spend too long in that. You can spend too long imagining, what the political ramifications of transhumanism are. But I'm like, I don't think your forecasts are going to be as nuanced as they should be to be accurate. You know what I mean? Just like we're talking about VR earlier. Like VR, it's going to be represent our world, but better. Like it's going to be a stranger hybrid than you're thinking. You're not going to be able to see it coming because it's not even the technology that dictates what the technology will be. Like he said in his own sort of chain of sequences of innovation, at a certain point, the inventor or the originator of the technology loses control, and then the technology itself loses control. It becomes this synthesized thing with the culture, where the culture dictates what it is, and then it dies, and then the culture almost has like the trauma of that technological experience that it carries into the next technology too. I guess that's what I was talking about earlier with what would happen in the collapse. Like, is there a floor we can't fall through where I'm using the word trauma here just as a word to use, but the trauma of us having innovated this far, will we try and reclaim that as fast as possible or however we can? Anyway, this is all just speculation. Anyway, it's a very, very speculative book. The heart of the book is, can machines achieve something like religious epiphanies? I think that's probably the wrong question to ask, but it is achievable if you view religious experience and religion itself as just, the firing of certain neurons to make you feel certain things that you could trigger with drugs or whatever, So yeah, you can give machines drugs, I'm sure, to make them hear voices, but is that what religion is? Well, it might be to someone like Ray Kurzweil, but this is the stuff they would debate a lot in the early 2000s. But anyway, I know we got to get going now. What do you think of that? I think you've probably summarized it already, but
Yeah. No, I mean, it's definitely important stuff to talk about. I think everybody should read a bit of Ray Kurzweil because it touches like the heart of what a lot of these tech futurist guys are going at. He's like a god to them, so it's worth knowing.
That's the thing. This is the bedrock that a lot of this stuff is built on. And like I was talking before about hyperstition, like there's a great many people who I think read his work and love his work and are trying with the backing of billions of dollars of capital to realize it. So even if you or the listener don't like Ray Kurzweil, there's a lot of people who do, who are trying to make this a reality. So become familiar with it.
Do not let the rapists win. Listen and love Blood Satellite.